to have you with us as we kick off a broadcast week here on Mad Dog Unleashed. Hi, everybody. Yours truly, Christopher Russo, on this Monday. It's the 26th day, is that correct, of the month of March. As we talk to you in 2018 about the world of sports with Eddie Erickson and Colin Schmeling. Christopher Russo will man the ship and take you home here on a busy day. We have a lot to do. Obviously, a lot of college basketball to do in the course of our day-to-day. That will probably be the most part of the show. A little baseball. We'll sprinkle it in. Opening days in 3 days. Maybe not so much today. We'll do more of the NCAA deal on this Monday program at 888 Mad Dog 6 on the great Sirius XM 82 as we chat. All right, let's go through. We've got a couple things to go through. I'm not sure how to handle this right out of the gate. Let me say this. It saved the weekend. But the first thing I want to say is the Duke-Kansas game was not a classic or not an epic and not one of the great games in the history of college basketball. I mean, I know everybody, including Bill Self, has, waxed poetic about the greatness of the Duke game against Kansas. Both teams were about the same shooting percentage, 30 for 70 Duke, 30-69 Kansas. Both teams were awful from the three-point line, 13 of 36 for Kansas, 7 for 29 for Duke. Do the math. That is 20 for 65, if I can add it right. 20 for 65. So the idea now, that's way less than 30%, 20 out of 30. Well, it's about, 31, 32%. The idea that this was, both teams were in some foul trouble. The whistle was a major problem, and the first half was choppy. So, yes, the game was very good, and yes, the game saved the weekend. The weekend was a terrible weekend. Villanova and West Virginia had some life on Friday afternoon for 2/3 of the game. Then it fell flat the last third. The Duke-Syracuse game was a labor of love. You had to really be into that style to watch that. And you never got the impression that Syracuse was going to win. Loyola killed Loyola, they played on Thursday. Who else played on? Those two. There was two other games. Villanova beat West Virginia. Texas Tech, Purdue, I didn't see a basket. They were in good shape when I put the thing on, and I said enough of this. Purdue was compromised throughout the whole tournament, of course, with all these injuries. And Kansas, although they had to work a little late against Clemson, won a game going away. The Saturday games, we'll get to Leonard Hamilton later on. The Florida State-Michigan game, albeit close, was not exciting and ugly, and the Loyola game wasn't going away. So and the West Virginia and the Villanova game yesterday against Texas Tech was a complete bore. So they needed a big game on Sunday afternoon to salvage the last 4 days, and they got one. That was, the second best game was the Loyola-Nevada game, if you look at the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. And the Duke-Kansas game was a very good game, but it was not an epic. So let's put that aside for the moment, and let's just put that away. The idea now that we watch, this game is not, Duke-Kentucky. This game is not North Carolina-Villanova. This game is not Georgetown and Villanova. This game is not the Carolina Georgetown game of 82. I mean, those are epics, okay? This game was very good, and, you had two heavyweights back and forth, could have gone either way, and this is what you got. 85-81 Kansas in OT. I know there was no tremendous lead advantages for either team. I know that you were in a situation where you had, obviously, no team, I think, had a bigger than, a 5-point lead. I don't think anybody had it at 7. And the game went into OT, and Kansas obviously won going away, and Duke had a chance to win at the end of regulation. So out of all those scenarios which you liked right out of the gate, but it's not an epic. That's the first thing. Second thing, I was disappointed, not because I root for Duke necessarily, and we know we have Krzyzewski. No Krzyzewski, by the way, today, but I know we talked to him a lot in March. I didn't root for Duke for that. I just wanted to see Duke-Villanova because I think if they played a best-of-7 series between Duke and Kansas, Duke would win 4 games to 2. I think Duke is better than Kansas. I think Duke yesterday had some issues with their big men. Let's face it. Our good buddy Bagley took 9 shots. Carter in this game took 9 shots. He fouls out. I think Duke's got better talent than Kansas, and I think Duke is a better team in a best-of-7 series. Now, this is not about best-of-7 series, but I think Duke's a better best-of-7 series team than the Jayhawks. Remember, in the NBA, the best team wins the playoff series 99.9% of the time. In college, the best team always doesn't win. You got to keep that in mind. It's one game. So it's a far different scenario, and Duke just happened to play Kansas in a 7-game series. They win a couple, and Kansas happened to win the game yesterday where they played head-to-head in a knockout round. And Kansas won. And give Kansas credit, Newman kid made a lot of shots in the second half. They got a big shot out of the kid from Ukraine, which was the biggest shot of the game, which tied it up late in regulation. Kansas made the plays they had to make. They were due. Self was 2-5 in Elite 8 games. They had lost the last 2 years to Villanova and Oregon. So you can make an argument that Kansas was due. And, you go to that well enough times. One of these days you're going to win one. And Kansas won a big game. And now, nobody's knocking Kansas. But I do think that Duke, much more of a polarizing team, much more of a, I hate Duke, I love Duke kind of team. And I think much more over a long series, a better team in Kansas, and I think Duke would have been much more competitive against Villanova. I think Duke-Villanova would have been one of the great games you would have had, at least on paper, in the NCAA tournament in a while. Kansas-Villanova doesn't do the same to me. Kansas-Villanova is a good game. It's a basketball game. It's a good game. It's not a heavyweight, at least on paper, it's not a heavyweight game. Nobody cares that much one way or the other about Kansas. Yeah, you don't have people who hate Kansas. You don't have people who love Kansas outside of Kansas. I mean, Kansas is a excellent program. They win. They're very consistent. He's a very good coach. They do what they have to do. It's been a great program for years with a million coaches. Going back, that's where the basketball was invented, for crying out loud. I mean, Kansas is a great program, one of the top 5 or 6 programs in the country, but nobody outside of Kansas feels that strongly one way or the other about Kansas. Outside of folks in Manhattan with K-State or Norman with Oklahoma, I don't think anybody in New York, Philadelphia, Miami, D.C., L.A., Seattle, nobody really cares that much about Kansas. And I think that hurts the game against Villanova. Plus, I think Villanova's going to win. And I think the Villanova-Duke game, I do think Villanova would have beaten Duke, but I think that has a better game on paper than the Kansas game does against Villanova. So I was rooting for Duke for those 2 reasons. And the third thing I want to get into in this game right out of the gate is that although that was an atrocious call on Carter's 5th foul, because that was an offensive foul, cost 2:49 to go in the game, Duke was up 1. That was an atrocious call. Nobody's going to argue with that. Horrendous. Nobody at Duke could ever complain about officiating. They get every call known to man. They've done it for years. They had only committed 3 fouls late in the second half in this second half game, while Kansas was already over the limit. Kansas had their big guy foul out 2, only played 19 minutes. The kid did not dribble the ball out of bounds on the play before that when Carter could have been called for his 5th there. So although I didn't like the call, and the call was a huge call in OT at 2:49 to go, 2:42 to go, nobody on the Duke side is going to argue about how they got a bad whistle, because Duke never gets a bad whistle. And this time they may have gotten a bad call, but overall, in the big theme of the game, nobody got a bad whistle. There was 16 foul calls on Duke, and I think 17 on Kansas, maybe the other way around. But it was 1 foul differential between the 2 teams. So nobody can scream and yell about the fouls in this game. That is absolutely, you can't do that. It's not fair, especially if you're a Dookie, because nobody gets more calls than Krzyzewski. So you can't say that. That is not fair. Now, listen, Duke shot the ball horrendously from 3. They were 4 for 19 combined, Gary, Trent, and Allen. Now, Allen took a couple of hoist 3s late, which, kind of were superfluous. Didn't really mean much. But, I mean, they got to count them as shots. I mean, they were that bad from 3-point land. And that is, when you shoot 4 for 19 from 3 and your 2 big offensive guys in the backcourt do that, and if you want to count Duval into the mix, who can't shoot anyway, I mean, that is 6 for 25. So their backcourt shot 6 for 25 from that is, you can't, that's very hard to win a game that way. Simple as that. 6 for 25. And that is a difference in the game when Newman made 5 threes in the second half. So, and the kid made the 3 to tie the game up, the big one at the end. So you got to, Trent made 1 big 3. I get that. And Allen made 4 big free throws. I get that. But their 3-point shooting here was a disaster. When we do get Coach K on, and we will get him on this week sometime, we will ask about Bagley only getting 9 shots. He played 44 minutes in the game. Remember, the game is only 40. He only sat 1 minute. He played 44 minutes in the game. And yes, I know Kansas's main responsibility here was to make sure they prevent Bagley from going crazy. But you got to figure you got to get him more than 9 shots. I mean, he got 9 shots in the game. I mean, you have to get him. I understand. Listen, their deal, Kansas, is to make sure he doesn't kill him, and they were going to live and die with the 3-point ball, and they were going to hope Duke missed him. I mean, that's what it came down to. And as it turns out, Duke did miss him, and they won the game. But you would like to have them force-fed Bagley a little more than they did. 9 shots for Bagley. He made 5 of them. It's just not enough shots. It's just not enough. And Bagley's a hell of a player. He's good around the basket. I mean, he's a great athlete. I mean, Bagley's got nice touch. Bagley's just a great player. He's going to be a great pro. But 9 shots to him, to me, is just not enough shots. To me. And now you're sitting there here in what, is going to be a Villanova Final Four. I mean, I know Loyola's a cute little story, and we're going to probably get into that in the course of the afternoon. I get that. I know there's a lot of Michigan fans and Beeline. I get that. And Kansas is, historically a very solid, very consistent, one of the top 5 or 6 programs in the country. Kansas with Kentucky, with Duke, with North Carolina. I mean, that's the sort of, that's the room they're in, Kansas. But, I would be surprised if Villanova doesn't win this tournament. I really would. Now, I think the worst thing that can happen to Villanova is playing Loyola. Villanova has pulled off a couple of surprises historically. The Georgetown one, of course, even 2 years ago against Carolina. Not a miracle shot, and they played great in the game, but, the big shot to win the title by Jenkins. But the funny thing is, watch Villanova play Loyola and watch Loyola do to Villanova what Villanova did to Georgetown, and watch Loyola win the whole thing. I think that's the most interesting matchup at the end. I think they need a Villanova-Loyola final. I don't think they're going to get it. But I think it's going to be Villanova-Michigan. But I think that would be the most intriguing final as far as the championship game next Monday is concerned. But it is Villanova's title to win. Villanova does a little bit of everything. All 5 guys can score. They rebound. They're good around the basket. They got a good point guard. They shoot great from 3. I mean, they got a great coach. I mean, Villanova they are the best team. Now, they have been the best team for the most part all season long. They've been the best team in these first 4 games of the tournament. And if this was the best of 7, they beat Kansas in 5 games, and they would sweep Michigan and Loyola. Now, this is not. This is a 1-game, get it done and go home type of scenario right now. And I would think Villanova, they could lose. I don't think they will lose against Kansas. I think if they did lose, it would be against Loyola. Funny thing is, I think they beat Michigan, and I think they're going to beat Kansas. I think the game that would scare me if I'm Villanova's Loyola, because Villanova's been the huge underdog to win one, and you know how the gods work. You get one, sometimes you lose one. They got one against Georgetown. They were a huge underdog 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it was. Watch Loyola finally win a championship. Wouldn't shock me. But the first premise of the day, not an epic. That's the first premise. Lot to do with it, not an epic. 17 after the hour, we continue. Mad Dog.